Turning now to that high-profile case, Lori Vallow Daybell, her trial piquing the interest of people all across the country. And it took less time than anticipated to seat a jury. They are now in place. The so-called Doomsday Mom, already convicted of killing her children in Idaho, she will be serving a life sentence up there. But now she's facing two separate murder conspiracy cases in Arizona. She is representing herself and has pled not guilty in both cases. The first trial, she's accused of conspiring to kill her former husband, Charles Vallow, so she could be with her current husband, Chad Daybell. Daybell also convicted of killing Lori's young children up in Idaho and also murdering his first wife, Tammy. The I-Team's Erica Stapleton spoke with one of the prosecutors in that Idaho case. Again, two guilty verdicts on what we can expect up there.
Lori Vallow is fundamentally a narcissist. The world exists for Lori in Lori's world. I'm not surprised at all that she is attempting to represent herself. She has been very successful, calculated way at manipulating people around her, manipulating men, manipulating facts to get people to do things for her in a way that's very unique.
Do you think she stands a chance?
I can't process that a jury paying attention will find her not guilty.
And Erica is here now with the backstory. Erica, you were there yesterday as the jury is now set. You know, that's not the first time that we've heard the many personalities of Lori Vallow Daybell, right?
Yes.
Even when we talked to NBC's Dateline Keith Morrison, he mentioned that she was flirtatious. What did you make of her actions, her tone, her attitude towards the judge yesterday when you saw her?
Well, it's been really interesting because yesterday was the first day potential jurors could see her, and she had the opportunity to ask them some questions. So did the prosecution, so did the judge. That's how you whittle down a jury in a case like this. And it was really interesting because we've seen her representing herself in hearings now, and she can get really fervent, really passionate, raising her voice, you know. And when she went up there to talk to those potential jurors, she was kind of quiet, more timid. And it was interesting. It brought me back to her trial in Idaho where we didn't hear a peep out of her. And she had attorneys in that case who were with her, so maybe that was their advice. But at her sentencing, she kind of comes out in a quiet voice, and then she starts talking about, you know, having these visions, and, you know, the term that the judge used in that case was religious delusion. She was down a rabbit hole deeply. So, and that's a bit of what we saw in that interview with Dateline too. So it'll be very curious to see what she's going to open with in her opening statements and how she might conduct herself, especially when a jury that's going to be determining her fate is in the room.
Does this jury know she killed her kids?
Not at this point, and
not supposed to, right? I mean,
not
it's a pretty
supposed
publicized
to, no.
case.
Yeah, and that was one of the questions that was asked of all of them is, have you seen this case? Do you know this woman? Do you know anything about this? And I was quite frankly surprised at the speed in which they seated a jury because of all, you know, the notoriety around this case, but you know, it was an efficient process. The judge is not playing around here. He's moving things along, and there, on both sides, there were very few people dismissed. There was a pretty big pool to choose from who claimed they'd not seen anything about this case. So that's where we should be going in.
But this, her testifying in a vacuum, or her doing her own case in a vacuum, you could see where she could kind of manipulate people, because it's mostly men in the jury, correct?
Yeah, as far as we can tell, and I will say that the court can't confirm anything about the jury. This is supposed to be private information, but being in the room, it appeared to be 13 men and 3 women. And those 16 people, all 16 will be sitting in and listening to testimony in this case. And then once testimony concludes, 12 of them will be moved on to deliberate, and 4 will be determined to be alternates in case something happens. So those are the people who will be listening to the facts of this case as it's presented. And I know coming up in our later shows, we'll be talking more about maybe the differences between this trial and the one in Idaho, and some of the similarities, because the core of this case really are those dark religious beliefs and her relationship with Chad Daybell, her current husband.
And what's interesting is how Arizona's selection process in picking out the jury, it's different than other states. It's changed over the years. What struck out to you when you were listening to the questioning of, you know, these potential jurors and just, you know, selecting them to be seated for this case?
Again, the amount of people that hadn't heard about this case was really surprising to me, but ultimately good for this court to be able to move forward like it has. We know that there was a venue change in Idaho because they were concerned about finding an impartial jury. And that selection process took a lot longer, but again, it's a smaller jurisdiction. And here we have tons of criminal cases going on all at the same time. So not surprising in that sense. And we did hear, based on some of the questions that the prosecutors and Lori were able to ask of the jury, we're expecting that religion will come into play here. They mentioned that, there will be a gun brought into the play here. So they asked if anyone had any biases towards guns. So we heard some of those kinds of questions, and that's what we're expecting to hear in the case. And what's interesting in Arizona, you mentioned some differences between here and other states, is that jurors are actually allowed to ask questions. And it's not that they can just raise their hand and say it, but they can say, hey, we have a question. They write it out, and that's something that the judge and both sides review. And if it's something that they're able to answer, then they'll do that. So
and that gives you insight sometimes as to what they're thinking.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Erica, thank you. You're going to be doing a lot of work on this, as we know. We're going to talk more about Erica and how you can watch this case, which I think will be interesting for a number of reasons.
A lot of eyes are going to be on this case.
Right. So Erica, thank you. So those opening statements are expected to start on Monday.
We're going to be live streaming that day and throughout the entire trial exclusively on 12+. So download the app on your TV right now and watch for free. We'll also have daily recap and analysis about what happens inside the courtroom. Again, that's exclusively on our streaming app 12+.
All right.